All right, getting on to our first topic, which is the definition and elements of fraud. Our first topic. All right, let's define fraud. Now, as your book tells you, there are many different ways to define it. The way that I'll use, so fraud is an intentional, dishonest act. Act meant to bring a benefit to one party while harming another. And I'm sure we've either heard about fraud or we have experienced it, right? There's lots of different types of fraud. We can have just plain old identity theft. We can have embezzlement of funds, of corporate funds. We can have just plain old theft. Right. Okay, and so we know that it's one party, like with the case with identity theft, we know it's one party, the dishonest party that is seeking to find some sort of gain for themselves by stealing another person's identity, right? So it's definitely going to harm the original person that has to go through proving who they are, getting all new credit cards. So it's definitely harming them. And the reason the criminal is taking this act is to bring themselves a financial benefit. Okay. Now, when we talk about fraud, it's usually illustrated with what's called the fraud triangle. Fraud triangle. So these are your elements of fraud. Elements of fraud. Lots of times all three will be present when fraud occurs, but sometimes it might just be one or two. Okay. So your elements are some sort of pressure is being experienced by the individual committing the fraud. It's either called pressure or incentive. There is rationalization that occurs by the individual committing the fraud. And then finally, there's opportunity, the ability to commit the fraud. Okay, so an example might be, if you've heard of the story of Enron, for example, there was pressure from the top for individuals to meet aggressive sales goals, and management kind of made it clear that we're okay with you using whatever means necessary to get there. And then they were rewarded once they met those aggressive sales goals. Okay, so there was pressure, you better meet those sales goals or else. And then when they met those goals, they got some sort of reward, right? So they were either felt the pressure to do it or they were driven by the reward to do it. Rationalization comes from the internal excuses that individuals make to their bad behavior, to rationalize their bad behavior. So they might say, well, this is okay for me to maybe pressure clients into buying packages they don't want or need because I need to make my sales goal and management is encouraging this. So maybe they're rationalizing their bad behavior. And then finally, they have the opportunity to commit that fraud, right? Maybe to record sales before they've actually occurred because there's no internal checks and balances to make sure that those sales really have been initiated properly. Okay, so those three elements normally occur. It might just be, pressure and opportunity, might just be rationalization opportunity, but I think the key one is there's got to be the opportunity, right? Unless people can commit the fraud, then there wouldn't be any fraud that occurred unless there wasn't a chance for that fraud to happen. And so then we look at, well, as a corporation, we really can't control what's going on in an individual's life. They're feeling financial pressure due to, financial obligations. We can't really control that. We can't control what they're going to tell themselves for their bad behavior, but we sure can control their ability to commit fraud, making sure they don't have access to certain, sensitive documents or bank accounts, things like that. So the rest of chapter 8 talks about how a company can minimize opportunity. And usually that's by designing internal controls. Okay, so companies can minimize the opportunity for fraud. It's hard to eliminate it all 100%, but they can definitely minimize the opportunity by designing an internal control system. And we're going to learn in topic 8.3 that this is now a requirement for public companies. It didn't used to be, but now public companies, if they sell their stock, right, to the public, they have to have an internal control system. All right, so in this brief lecture video, you learned the definition of fraud and the 3 elements that make up fraud.